Chapter 21, The Progressive Spirit of Reform. Section 3, The Progressive Presidents. We're going to start off with the first of three progressive presidents. His name is Theodore Roosevelt, also known as Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt called his policy, his reform policy, the square deal. Essentially what that means is everyone has a fair chance in society. No one group will overperform or outdo another group. Now, he used a square deal policy to help settle a 1902 coal miner strike. Roosevelt threatened to take over the mines, meaning government would take over the mines, unless managers agreed to arbitration. Now, arbitration is a formal process for settling disputes with strikers. So, here's Roosevelt. Here's Roosevelt with the managers of the coal mines. This is a nice political cartoon showing you really the attitude among coal miners and the managers. Here's the mine owner being beat up by the coal miner. There was a book that came out around this time by an author named Upton Sinclair. It's called The Jungle, and The Jungle was a book about the meat packing industry and how contaminated meats would get packed up and sent out to stores for people to buy and get sick, maybe even die over it. Roosevelt was greatly influenced by this book, and after reading it, he urged Congress to enact meat inspection laws. So Congress will pass the Pure Drug and Food Act in 1906, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transport of mislabeled or contaminated foods and drugs. This particular group, the Pure Drug and Food Act, is still in existence today. It is a way to monitor to make sure that no meat gets contaminated and sent out to the public. Roosevelt persuaded Congress to regulate railroad shipping rates. What that means is to kind of control how much a railroad charges to ship goods across the country. He was also the first president to successfully use the Sherman Anti-trust Act to break up monopolies. A monopoly is when a particular business has complete control over a particular industry. I'll give you an example of grocery stores. In St. Louis, there were three grocery stores for a long time. It was Schnucks, Dierberg's, and National. And National went out of business. Schnucks bought out all the National stores. That would have a monopoly of the grocery store chains in St. Louis. Government came in and said Schnucks had to sell some of those stores because it wasn't fair to Dierberg's that Schnucks would have that much control over the grocery store business. That's what a monopoly does, and that's what the Sherman Anti-trust Act did back in the early 1900s, was to break up those monopolies. So everyone had a fair chance. Roosevelt was a strong supporter of conservation. Conservation is the protection of nature and its resources. Now, he had different groups that were considered preservationists. Those are people who want to save the earth and save nature. Two different groups within the preservationists who wanted his help. You have one group who wanted to preserve nature just because they wanted to save the beauty of nature. And you had another group who wanted to save the natural resources and to use them more efficiently, not, using them up to destroy the earth. Roosevelt responded by adding 150 million acres of public land to the Forest Service to regulate the use of forest resources by businesses. He doubled the number of national parks to preserve natural beauty, as you can see with Mount Rushmore. He created 18 national monuments, and he started 51 bird sanctuaries. He is given the name, well, I shouldn't say he is given the name, but the teddy bear, as you see here, was named after Theodore Roosevelt and his conservation efforts. Roosevelt served 2 terms as president, but decided not to run for a 3rd term. But he kind of, in a way, hand-selected who the next president would be, a member of his cabinet named William Howard Taft. And because of Roosevelt's backing, William Howard Taft easily won the election of 1908. Taft was, however, a little more cautious than Roosevelt when it came to reform and regulation. And that kind of angered Roosevelt a little bit because he thought Taft was more like him. The progressives were disappointed in Taft's approach to reform. Taft signed something called the Payne-Aldrich Tariff, which raised prices for consumers. And of course, many progressives opposed this because it raised prices for consumers. Just a little side note here, and the reason why I have this picture here of this bathtub. William Howard Taft is known as getting stuck in his old bathtub, so because he's kind of a large guy, and so they had to make this special bathtub to put in the White House, and it's in the White House Museum today. But it's this huge, gigantic bathtub for William Howard Taft. Taft will run for re-election in 1912 for the Republicans. Again, though, Taft was not very popular. And many saw him as a person not like Roosevelt, who was constantly going after trust, trying to break up trust, trying to break up monopolies. Taft kind of gets a bad rap on that because actually Taft went to court on more monopolies than Roosevelt ever did. But they see him as someone weak on reform. So Teddy Roosevelt, so angry with Taft, decides he's going to run again for president. But he can't run for the Republican Party because Taft is running for them. So he forms his own third party called the Progressive Party, but it's nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. And the reason why it's called the Bull Moose Party is when Roosevelt was out there on the campaign trail, he was giving a speech one day, and someone walked up to him and shot him as he's giving the speech. And he fell over. He gets back up, and he keeps delivering a speech. And someone on the crowd goes, "He's as strong as a bull moose." And so the Progressive Party got nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. Woodrow Wilson will run for the Democrats, and another guy named Eugene Debs will run for the Socialist Party. So 4 guys who are all reformers are running for president. Now Taft and Roosevelt, being Republicans essentially, they're going to split their votes, Republican votes, which makes it very easy for Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, to win the election of 1912 by a wide margin. Now, as you can see from the map here, Woodrow Wilson had 435 electoral votes. That's a lot. Where Taft only had 8 electoral votes, which is kind of embarrassing if you say so, for standing president, and Roosevelt had 88 electoral votes. But Woodrow Wilson will win that election. Woodrow Wilson, when he becomes president, will introduce the modern income tax. Today, employees of all jobs, when they get their paycheck, they get money taken out of their paychecks for Social Security and for income taxes. And you don't have to pay them in April. This is made possible by Woodrow Wilson. And it was ratified as the 16th Amendment in 1913. He also addressed banking reform with something called the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, which created a national banking system, similar to when we talked about the Bank of the United States a long time ago. And the Federal Reserve is still around today. Wilson also pushed for laws to regulate big business, more control over monopolies. The Clayton Anti-trust Act of 1914 strengthened laws against monopolies, and the Federal Trade Commission in 1914 had the power to investigate and punish unfair trade practices. So when I talked about the grocery store incident in St. Louis, the Federal Trade Commission is the one that ruled that Schnucks had a monopoly in St. Louis, and they had to sell some of those old national stores. That is the end of Section 3.